This is podcast episode number 2, and we're going to be talking about vertical development. Well, that's to say, Archana is going to tell us a bit, and I'm going to interview you, right? That's
Yes. Let's see. There could be moments
I
where
may add things, but
yes.
we're going to have a conversation about it. But what we did agree, and what might be helpful for those who are listening and watching us, is that we agreed that you were going to do a lion's share of this, just because I think you're very good at that. So I asked you to do that, and then we'll see where we go with the dialogue. So I'm going to try and place myself, which is hard knowing about this for 20 years now, but in the shoes of someone who doesn't know about vertical development.
Yeah.
And I thought my first question would be, and this is a question I ask myself whenever I bring it up, what is it? I mean, why the word vertical mixed with development? Yeah. So that's where I would like to start with my question.
Yeah, and I think that was also my question when I heard the term the first time, vertical development. It just seemed very interesting, and because I didn't know it, I tried to kind of go to the very basic. So when we talk about growth, like anything that grows, think of a plant or like babies growing or people growing up, physically speaking. So we are not objects on a page, right? So we are three-dimensional. So we grow upwards and we also grow sideways, right? So if I just think of that like in a mathematical geometrical term, so there are two ways that we grow. We grow horizontally and we also grow vertically. But in the sense of like growth and development from within, that's where the vertical development comes. So when we are growing horizontally, what it means is like we are here, say for example, we are at a particular phase in our life and we decided to get another degree, and we went to university or college or school and got a degree. So what it did is gave us information, gave us skill, or gave us a training to understand something external. So that allowed that allowed our horizontal growth. So we remained where we were, but we grew. So it kind of like we attained girth or breadth, if that makes sense. But we remain there. We see the world in the same way. We have the same lens. And whatever we thought about the world and ourselves, that did not change. We just gathered more information. So that's horizontal growth, which is very important, which is the way we are at the moment. Generally in society, we expect our children to go to school, then go to university, then, get a professional degree. All of those growth and development are horizontal. So what is vertical? Vertical is when we are going from here to here and we go, we can see more things. Obviously, where we come from is also there with us. So we are not leaving this, but we are kind of taking a step up in the sense that we start to see the world with a different lens. So that's what happens. With vertical development, we acquire a completely different way of looking at the world while also including how we used to look at the world before. So that's the vertical development. And at the very beginning, I would say that both horizontal and vertical development are important. So it's not one or the other, but because we're going to talk about vertical development today, that's where the focus will be.
Great. And I just noticed that as I was listening, it raised so many questions for me that actually I hadn't thought about necessarily before. So I thought about how in growth, if we think about people, there's also a time that growth ends or that maybe really goes back if we talk about the physical body, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden I thought, what might there be there? And we may not even want to go into that now, but that was one of the things. The other one, when you were speaking, it also gave me metaphors. So I saw walking up a mountain and being able to look back on where I've been, knowing I've been there and now I'm here and I can see more. And sometimes you can only see the whole picture when you get to the summit
Yes.
of a mountain. So
It's a
metaphor came up
fantastic
as well.
metaphor. It's actually one of the best way to understand vertical development. Yes. So what happens when we are climbing the mountain is when we are at the base, we can only see the surrounding, the vicinity, just right in front of us, and then we start climbing. So what we can also see is other people climbing and where other people are who are who are still
Mm.
climbing and who are still making the journey. So we know what's down there, right? But we don't know what's up there. So as we keep going, and it's the same thing with vertical growth. So as we move along the stages, and it happens in stages. So that's another important thing. So just like little children, we are, babies, and then we become toddlers, and then we become, kids, and then adolescents, and like that. So it's this distinct stages, and each stage has a distinct capacity for doing things. So it can come across as making a judgment and saying you can or you can't do that, but essentially that's how it works. So a baby who can only crawl cannot walk, but a kid who can walk can also crawl. So that's how it goes.
Hmm. And so, as I'm listening to that, does it start when we're children, or is there a different sort of development when we're children and then we have a next stage as adults, or how does that work?
So overall, this psychology is called adult development psychology. However, if you look at the growth, we are actually looking at babies onwards. So it depends on different schools of thought also. There are many, many scholars who have been working on it for last 50 years and gathering data and doing more research. And time and again, they keep coming back to the same thing as, yes, we grow in different stages and we grow vertically. So meaning we are changing our perspective and shifting our perspective. So it's not, we are not looking at the world the same way anymore. We acquire a qualitatively distinct lens. Some schools, for example, Robert Keegan, he looks at the stage one as kids, as children, and then stage two as teenagers or adolescents who haven't become an adult. And then adults are sort of stage two also, but then those adults struggle in like conventional world or to deal with people, those who are, he uses the term stuck at stage two and haven't moved beyond. So according to Keegan's theory, it's only from stage three onwards that we are looking at like proper adult growth in our mindset. Whereas the other schools like Bill Torbett and all, they are not talking about children. They begin with the opportunist stage, who are still adults, but sort of like I would say similarly, they would be struggling to live a very good life or a very satisfying life at that stage, because again, the way they look at the world is not the way the adults look at the world. So those are
Yeah.
that's the difference.
Mm. So I have two next questions. I'm going to ask both because you will probably know where to go first. So one I had was if I'm no, so one was, is it better if I'm at the top than if I'm still at the bottom of the mountain? Is it always better to see the whole view than to just see the mountain ahead of me and the base of the mountain? And the other one was, can everyone get to the top? I don't know which one's more helpful to start with.
Very good question. And I think for our audience, if you don't know much about this field, just to kind of wrap your head around. So as I said, there are different schools of thoughts. There are different scholars who have developed their own theories. Mainly, the theory remains the same, but their terminology and how they come back to that learning or understanding is a little bit different. So according to them, there are different stages. If you take Keegan, then there are 5 stages. If you take Torbert and other scholars, then there are 7 stages. So there are, number one, there are different stages. Number two, how we move from one stage to the other is entirely the function of our environment and our interaction. So if our environment allows us to grow, then we'll grow. And if our environment doesn't allow us to grow, then it's very difficult for us unless we become very deliberate and we start to seek that environment, then that happens. So what is a good environment? A good environment is where we are challenged and in our current belief. So each stage gives us a current belief system. So we believe that X works like this, or this is how people interact, or the belief that the world operates like this. We all have a different belief at different stage. And essentially what happens is as we move from one stage to another, and I've mentioned before that we include the previous stages. So we actually grow and expand in that sense. We don't forget how we were at previous stage and then we keep moving to the next stage. So to answer your first question, is it always better to be at the summit? The answer would be it's only better in the sense that by the time we have gone to the summit, we have acquired a whole toolbox, a really big toolbox to deal with life. And so what happens is at the summit, we have developed the capacity to deal with each stage of life, or to deal with what comes at every stage, to deal with different circumstances, because we have been there, simply because of that, because we have acquired those experiences of different stages. So it's basically like if I can drive a manual car, it's very easy for me to drive an automatic. But if I've only learned to drive automatic car, it'll be very difficult for me to drive the
I
manual, which is
love that
actually
metaphor. Yeah.
literally true in my case. So I can only drive automatic. I haven't learned to drive the manual. So it's almost like that. So it's not better or worse. I'm a driver. I can still drive a car. But if I had done the manual course as well, then I would have more options. So this is what to say, that
Mm.
as we grow, as we develop, as we continue to climb up to the summit, we acquire more capabilities or skills or complexity management tools to deal with different circumstances. And again, for me, what is the most important thing and why I think I would keep working and see if I can get to the summit is because each time I grow vertically, I develop a sense of compassion. I develop a sense of better understanding people. So in that sense, I would say yes. However, none of the literature say that as we grow, we also become more compassionate. It doesn't say that, but in my experience, that is what's happening with me as I'm growing and developing. I can now understand people who are at an earlier stage. And when I don't understand people who are people, then I assume that they're at a later stage because I'm not able to understand the worldview. So what it has given me is a smoother navigation of the world. Smooth, kind of when I understand people more, it gives me a better idea of how to deal with them. And so I'm hurting people less, and I'm becoming less angsty. I'm becoming less concerned about what people think of me, because I
Mm.
have this tool to understand, to make sense of the world better.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I would say yes, it is better to be at the summit than at the bottom, but not in the quality, not in the sense of humanity. So you don't become a better human. You don't become happier. So these are the things to keep in mind, because
Mm.
as we grow and go to the summit, you would also notice in majority of the climbing cases that not everyone go to the summit. So you may be lonely. You may have very, very few people to share your heart out with, and you may be less people who would understand you. So those complexities also come along. It's never one way. Um, Many people have actually reported feeling lonely as they grow. So the companionship, or maybe though because a lot more people now don't understand you, so you keep that in mind. You can understand them, but it doesn't go the other way because they haven't traveled the path that you have already. So those are the things that come along. It's not always rosy, it's not always happy, and it's not always easy. So those are the things to keep
Yeah.
in mind.
Yeah, I was just seeing the picture in front of me, of course, knowing about this as well. And we know there's one stage that is probably quite appreciated in business because it's getting a lot done and it's
Yeah.
achieving a lot. And it's very motivated, it's conscientious. And I was just imagining a city on the hill where all these lively, vibrant, active people live.
Mm.
And the question, would you want to leave that? Would you want to go out of that and go out alone again? Yeah, the view might be better even further up the hill.
Yeah.
But there's also a walk. So, um, there's something to each stage of the journey.
Yeah.
In my own experience, I absolutely recognize what you say about the becoming more compassionate.
Mm.
Um, that's also something that's held for me. So understanding myself and others better. So I think for me, it's also the part that with each stage, I've understood myself a little bit better. And so if I understand myself better, I'm also better able to see what do I project onto others? What do I expect from others? Where am I unreasonable towards others?
Yes,
Of course, in the moments that I keep my states, because I think one of the things is we can also fall off the hill, can't we?
we can.
And
Yes,
regress.
yes, yes. Yeah, there is
You want to
regression.
say something about that?
Yes, so when we are climbing, we don't just keep climbing. There are moments in our life when we regress. So regression is a real thing. When do we regress? In the moment of anger, frustration, or maybe just a tragedy that we were not expecting. Something unexpected happens, and in that moment, we tend to regress to an earlier stage, and we start tapping in from that. So that happens, although it's temporary in majority of cases, and we come back. We come back to where we were because the center of gravity is our current stage, and it's very hard for us to move from it either up or down. But in moments of those regression, we do go back and then we bounce back, hopefully, if the environment kind of bounces back, or if we are back from the whatever was troubling us, then we tend to go back to our center of gravity. And I think it did occur to me while we are talking, is we are talking the like this, we are having this smooth conversation because we both understand this theory. For our audience, I feel like we should give them the stages, like what are the
Yeah,
stages
I
and
was
what.
just thinking about that.
So then I think it'll be very useful for them to understand or maybe see themselves where they are
Yeah.
also.
No, and I noticed two things in myself as because I was thinking we probably need to start to get to the stages. And at the same time, I thought sometimes I find when we encounter the stages, that's when we, even though we say, you know, it's a stage and you might even be going from one to the other, it's not fixed. That's where sometimes the labels can come in.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where people may feel not appreciated, may feel, oh, but I don't like that label, so I want to be at the next. So I notice in myself a hesitation to go there.
Yes.
Also because I love these theories, and I find that it really helps me think about the world. It helps me think about me and our work. And then sometimes I also notice the shadow side. And I think what we're really wanting to do is introduce people to the potential of
Yes.
thinking about this,
Yes.
not to, and how it may open up.
Mm.
As I was talking to one of my colleagues today, that she said one of the things she loved about this model in relation to other ways of thinking about people is that actually there is a road behind you that you've traveled, and there's
Mm.
a road in front of you. But I think it's with that intention,
Mm.
it would be wonderful if you would say something about the
And
stages.
thank you. I'm glad that you actually put that context around, because that is essentially the case. It's what I love about this theory, again, like you, is it's not fixed. We are not being given a label of this is your personality type, this is how you always are, and this is how you always will be. So what I love about this theory is the human potential. What it essentially does is lays down a pathway for our continued growth, because the conventional understanding or the conventional wisdom is that when we were children we grew through these stages and we did different things, and once we become adult, then that's it, we don't change. And I've heard this from a lot of people. Oh, people don't change, people don't change, we don't change. And I probably ascribed to that worldview as well until I came to this theory. And to my utter delight, I was like, no, people can change, and we can go through this journey and achieve the potential, the ultimate potential. And what is the ultimate potential? Let me just put that out first. And why I love this is because both Eastern philosophy or spirituality and Western philosophy, they both converge in this one matter of the ultimate human potential is to be able to have no boundaries between us and them, is to be able to see ourselves as part of one scheme, one source, and we are all together. And I think this vision of the ultimate adult development and the ultimate refinement of our mind, you take any philosophy, any spirituality, any human growth literature, that's where it ends. So we are all talking about the same thing. And again, going back to answering the question, is it better to get to the summit? In my mind, I would love to, so that I can see myself as part of everything. And breaking those boundaries are so essential, particularly in the world that we are living today, the world where we are living so divided. You take any topic and we are all divided. I mean, political parties are the very obvious division. So whether I support X or I support Y, then we are divided. We are somehow different people. Or if I am going on and marching to protect the environment, or if I'm going on and marching to protect the economy, we are divided. And so, that deep division, it just, for me, it's becoming more and more and more sort of useless, because we are all in it together. When we talk about, you are such a right-wing person or you're such a left-wing person, well, we need both wings to fly. So I think what this growth, the vertical growth, does is gives us the ability to slowly start to see that the either or world is only half the truth. We are carrying only half the truth all the time. So how about we look at the other half? What is the other half doing for me? And then ultimately, there are no halves. There is just one pole, and we are at the other end of it, but it's just one continuum. So I know it sounds very philosophical, but for me, that's also the most practical use of the vertical development. So if that makes sense. And in that regard, there is no label. There are just the names of the stages through which we cross, through which we pass and make our journey. And and we get out of the one station, enjoy the view for however long we can enjoy the view, and then we get on the train and then go to the next station, and it keeps going. The journey, it's a journey. It's not a destination that will ever arrive, I think, in this lifetime, because there's no end to how much refinement we can have and how much more we can kind of see the world through just oneness and the no division. And I know a lot of the audience might be thinking, well, it's impossible. We have to go and vote for one party or the other, so we have a preference. That's a completely different thing. We obviously will have a preference, but I think in my mind, we need both sides to be governing. In the governing party, if one party wins and they are the government, we need as strong an opposition to keep them accountable and all of that. So that's where I'm coming from. And in that practical sense, if we can all start thinking and all wishing well for the government and the opposition so that they are both as strong as each other, then I think we are living in a better world. What do you
Sorry,
think?
I muted myself because I heard some noise in the background. Yeah, and I love that. If we can both wish the best for our government and for the opposition, and see that. And also, there are no labels. There are stages we pass through. So it's stations. And right now, you're at this station. And then you came from there, and you've got a choice to go there.
Yeah.
But maybe you really like it here, and you might want to stay here. So,
Exactly.
what are the stations on the journey?
So let's pick up Torbett. So Bill
Mm.
Torbett is one of our finest scholar in this field, and there are many. Suzanne Cook-Grutter would be in the same sort of school of thought, and then Robert Keegan has taken a slightly different slant on it, and he looks at it from the point of view of subject and object. So how we move from becoming subject to something to then looking at it as an object, and then we progress. So we can do that in the next session maybe. But for today, I think we'll take Bill Torbert's, and then I would invite you to also jump in.
Yes,
So
I will.
so Bill Torbert, I think, does 7 stages, isn't it? Am I right? 7 stages of development. So
Yeah.
from opportunist to alchemist or alchemical. So he goes from opportunist to then diplomat, expert, achiever, redefining,
Finding,
transforming, and
transforming, and
alchemical.
early alchemical.
Early
Uh,
alchemical, because they
yeah,
cannot
because
look at any
yeah,
further through the conventional scale that they have at the moment. And even at early alchemical, there are rare, very rare, I think, rare people who are traveling at that stage at the
yeah.
moment. So,
And
and this,
what I think what I found really interesting, because I had to do some research on this recently for some colleagues to give some validity and reliability, is that they've done some research and they said to go beyond that, we just don't have enough reliability in
yes,
scoring.
yes,
So we can say it's later stage, we can say it's at least early alchemical, but to make the difference between alchemical and the next stage, or even late
yes,
alchemical, that's it's too almost also unique, I
unique.
think, at
Yes,
that
yeah, it's
stage.
so unique that you cannot. There is
You
no
can't.
pattern. Yeah,
Yeah,
we don't know the pattern. Yes.
yeah,
But people at earlier stages, they have done the research, and based on the research, there is a pattern that has emerged. So people at, say, opportunist stage do certain things, or it's called action logic. So the logic we use to take action. So each
yeah.
stage has a distinctive, very clear action logic. So we use that logic and we take action at that stage. And then what happens is we start to find some limitation in our current belief system. And the environment, if the environment is kind of like pushing us or questioning us or making us question, like, oh, hang on a second, this is not working, then we start to look for the other way. And then slowly in that process, how we are thinking starts to become very clear to us. So it becomes object to us. We are no longer merged with it, and we can separate from it. We can look at it, reflect on it, and then we are like, oh, so this is how I think. And in those moments, the slow transformation start to happen, and then we start to move to the next stage. So why don't you take us through the opportunist stage, Sidske?
So it's really interesting because, in some ways, I really admire some of the qualities of the opportunist stage. So I may just touch on those and not do it justice, because, of course, there are disadvantages to that as well. The opportunist stage is really about taking opportunities as they come. So seeing an opportunity, latching onto it, because you are taking care of yourself. So little concern for those beyond, and really, what's the opportunity for me? How do I make use of that? Which is a very useful stage to go back to, even at later stages, because then we might become so rule bound. So rules are also not so important to this stage. So they can be broken because there's an opportunity that's more important. Now, rules may be broken at later stages as well for very different reasons, but at this stage, it's who can do something to me. So it's gone past the impulsive stage, but might still, for those who've evolved further or moved further, look a bit impulsive, like responding to, oh, there's an opportunity, there's something there, or there's a threat, so I'm going to put
Mm.
that away. Um, Not sure I've described that very well, but that's what it
Yes.
evokes in me
Yeah, so
immediately.
as the name suggests, and that's why I like these names, because it's very easy to explain. So the name
Yeah,
suggests that at this stage, our main preoccupation is survival. So
yeah,
that's literally how, because we are just kind of growing and coming on this journey, right? So the very first thing we try to do is to survive. So how do we survive is really, really well done by this stage. So we take any opportunity to survive. Our only concern is not to be caught. So we are not concerned about the rules or the right or wrong. We are only concerned about not being caught. So these are the two main preoccupation of this stage, and it gives us the survival skill, which we take with us throughout our life. So as I mentioned, we always include our stages and then we transcend, and we include and transcend. So we kind of become expansive when we are growing. So we never forget to be an opportunist. We are always an opportunist, but then we also become something more or something added to it. So in that sense, it's a fantastic, fantastic stage. If we need to survive, if we are like firefighters, for example, you have to, when there is fire, you have to have this opportunist mindset to just jump in and do something about it. No rules, no regulations, no nothing, just survival. So that's the stage, the
Yeah.
early stage of opportunist. Anything you want to add?
And yes, because I think the one thing is we do bring it with us, but because we get educated in certain rules and begin to see the world in a different way, there may be stages in which we do not really want to fall back into that, in which we do pass opportunities by, in which maybe we even may not think so much about our survival.
Yeah.
Um, because we're in so deeply in this new stage and maybe not far enough along to be able to look back, that we may not grab those opportunities. We might still admire it because
Yes.
we've left it behind and buried it,
Yeah.
but we may not always be able to use it so well. So I think that's yeah.
And there's a reason why it's an early stage, because we are further along. We need to develop further along to be more compassionate people. Because so opportunists may not come along as truly compassionate people because they do not have the ability to say beyond their needs. They are
Yeah.
still so merged with what they need, how they need to survive, that they actually truly do not understand that other people also have needs, and to have the empathy and compassion that's needed. So yes, there are limitations, and there's a reason why there are early stages, because then you have to move along and acquire more tools. So at this stage we do not have the tools, literal tools of compassion and empathy. We lack that. And then we move on. So then what happens is, then we start to, one day or the other, we start to realize that this self-centeredness, this opportunity grabbing life, or this constant need for just meeting my own requirements and demands is not enough to live in this world, in the adult world at least. So then we begin to see the limitation, and slowly and slowly we start to have that need for belonging, because at opportunist stage we do not strongly feel the need to belong. We just need to, the only need is to meet my demand. But slowly we want to, because as humans that's another very important need. So after the need for survival is met, then the need to belong emerges in us. And then we begin to see the world through that lens. So now we belong to a community, we belong in a family, we belong to a club, we belong to a party. So anything, like our sense of belonging becomes really strong at this stage. And all we want to do is belong. And for that, whatever I need to do, I will do. So then we start pleasing people, then we start bending over backwards to do things for them at the expense of our own needs. So that's what starts to happen. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting now knowing this. I can see those stories of belonging in my own youth.
Yeah.
I can even see sort of the moment I was probably pushed out of that, when I couldn't belong anymore because I was being teased by specifically one girl and some others around her. And so I didn't belong anymore. So I needed to figure out, so if I don't belong there, what's the next?
Yeah.
Um, and I was also thinking this sense of belonging is so primal to us humans. As you say, it's survival and then it's belonging. And at the moment, working in change, I notice how very often leaders forget to pay attention to this belonging.
Yes.
Um, and even I'm just now wondering, so this is on the fly, but I wonder if when things are changing and we are under stress, we may even be thrown back a little bit into that stage of diplomat
Yes.
belonging.
Yes.
So I think I was just remembering, yeah, so most people who are leading change are not in that stage, do not necessarily pay attention to that. And yet that is so critical as
Yes.
we're changing. And I think those wounds of not belonging maybe in our youth are activated ever again
Yeah.
when we're in change. So how do we give enough attention to that? How do we find that part of us that
Mm.
used to be so good at that, that knew how to be a part of peer groups, how to be a part of a family?
Yes. Yes.
Um,
This, yeah, the strong sense of belonging. And then, so along with the strong sense of belonging comes the need to follow rules because I need
yeah,
to follow rules to belong. So at the previous stage, we didn't care about the rules because that was not our concern. Now that's our concern. We want to belong. We want to do the right thing. So we are very rigid, still rigid at this stage. The rules are good. Breaking rule is bad. It doesn't matter like in what circumstance. So again, the expansive way of looking at the world hasn't happened yet. It's still relatively fixed. So it's still relatively right or wrong, black and white. A lot of people are just they don't question. So we don't question authority at this stage. We are just going with the flow because the one thing that's driving us is I want to belong. I want to please. I want to be a part of it, whatever it takes. So that's the center of gravity. And then, as you would assume, sooner or later, all we are doing is literally giving ourselves up in the service of others, and that's not sustainable. So then we start to realize that this is not enough. What we are doing is in the um, in the quest of belonging, I'm losing myself. So that's the kind of query that slowly begins. And who am I? I have lost myself in this club or in this family or in this situation or in this party and then slowly we start to turn around, emerge from that stage and go, who am I? So that's the next stage of expert. And we want to stand out. After being merged with everything, we now want to stand out as an expert. So we need some expertise to stand out and look at other people and go, okay, how can I make a mark for myself? And we choose our expertise, our knowledge, our education. Or I am the best engineer out here, I'm the best lawyer, I'm the best accountant. So those are the kind of things and behavior and mindset we start to exhibit. It's very natural. And now, through our knowledge, we become something or someone distinct from where I belong. So the belonging is there. So keep in mind, now we know how to survive. Now we know how to belong. And now we are moving on to how to become an expert or someone who holds knowledge. So we are important and we are powerful. So those are the kind of thoughts that start to become. And the stage is obviously called the expert stage. You want to add,
yeah,
Sitski?
yeah. Because we also in that stage, so we are finally almost starting to become right something. It's like um, are we starting to be a separate person? Because I was
Yes.
thinking about being and becoming. So now we are a separate person. And we still follow rules, though, but we follow
Yes.
rules within our group of experts.
Yes. Yes.
So we follow rules if someone sets them who has the expertise, who
Yes.
we believe in, who we trust, who we know has the knowledge, and our trust and our belief in people is based on that knowledge, that expertise or craftsmanship.
Mm.
Um, and there's still some sense for me, as I think of it, of community, but it's a far smaller community. So it's a community of experts
Yes.
rather than the sea of the community of just
Yeah.
people around me.
Yeah.
Uh, so it may also come with separating from what you belonged to before,
Yes.
separating from maybe your family of origin or a group of friends in favor of the
Mm.
belonging to or the being a craftsman, being an
Yes.
expert.
Yeah.
And that black and whiteness, I think, is even extrapolated here. It's
Yeah.
there in the belonging, but if the belonging would shift, the group you belong to would shift its ideas, then you might shift yours.
Yeah.
The expert, it becomes also more entrenched within your own ideas.
Yes.
And I read somewhere separately, that there was some research about engineers and fundamentalism, and
Yes.
how somehow the engineering education, which is quite black and white, so quite also like building
Yes.
expertise, can actually encourage all sorts of fundamentalism.
Yes.
And that made sense for me with the expert stage too. And not in the way we normally use fundamentalism as something bad. Of course, it can have not positive consequences, but also as, there's such a belief, almost like a surrender to that knowledge,
Yeah.
to
Yes.
that truth with a capital T that you believe in.
True. Yes. Yes. And then, no pun intended. So, so then, yeah, the experts also tend to not really seek feedback from anyone other than they think they're expert in their field. So as you said, now we are belonging in smaller communities. So we are not like belonging everywhere and trying to belong anywhere, but we have this notion of just huddling together with fellow experts or people who have knowledge, or there are a lot of people who would say things always quoting an expert, or they're just bringing quotations from other people to kind of like strengthen their own viewpoint because someone that they think is great in their area or expert in that area thinks that. Still very much either or thinking, and as you say, even fundamentalism. So it's very much like if I'm a left wing party, then right wing people are not good, and vice versa. And if I belong to right wing, then left wing can't be good. So it's still very either or mindset, but they are really, really efficient. They focus on efficiency, focus on getting the task done, focus on using their expertise. So they are very, like, if you like the word productive, one of the most productive employees, in any organization. So there is this really fabulous sort of skill and quality of being an expert, and also the limitations. So each stage, as we are going through, you will notice that each stage brings in an amazing quality, but each stage also has this shadow. Everything has a shadow. So every stage has a quality and then a disadvantage or shadow. I would say not disadvantage, but limitation, because
Yeah.
the journey is about expansion and flexibility. And you can see how through each stage we become more flexible in many ways, in many, many ways, and mostly in the way that we look at the world. So even at expert stage, we haven't become all that flexible. So then
Mm.
when we are trying to stand out and being an expert and all of that, and we have done that enough, and we have done the efficiency and all of that. So say, for example, I'm an expert, I'm an engineer in my organization, and then here comes an amazing promotion and I become a manager. So now my expertise and my skills and all of that obviously were needed, but with that
Mm.
added responsibility of looking at things strategically, looking cross department, because up until now I was only talking to my engineers and the engineering department. Now I have to talk cross department, looking at various other disciplines and then making strategic decisions. And efficiency is okay, it's still needed, but now I need to be effective. So how do I do that? Now I feel limited. And so my organization has thrown this challenge at me. So here is my potential to grow. But I will grow if my organization also supports me in taking that challenge, becoming strategic, having that managerial skill and quality through training, through guidance, through I find a mentor, all of that. And then I move on to become an achiever. And at achieving level, because I have been given this task to look broader, I will kind of reach out to it. I'll reach out to do that and to perform at that level. And now I'm not just thinking of me and my own people, I'm thinking of like a broader society. So now it goes from being, so we start with egocentric, then we become ethnocentric, and then we start to become world centric. So this is a stage at achiever, we kind of like moving from ethno to world, but kind of somewhere in between. So the people at achiever stage will be your volunteers, your parent teacher, your parent volunteer at school, or the volunteers at clubs, or the Rotary Club members who are Lions Club members, who really want to do good by their society, because it's not enough just to think about ourselves. And then the effectiveness comes, a little bit of strategic kind of thinking, strategic action logic is now coming in, and either or logic is now questioned. So I'm looking at going, yep, I need to deliver on the bottom line, economic bottom line, but is there more to it? So I've started to question at this stage. So over to you, Sidskip.
Yeah. And and I want to talk in a moment about the energy. I think it's important to know there's still a framework around it. So there's still more of a sense of this is how the world works. It's
Yes.
not quite open yet. And of course, the name achiever says so much. So it is about achieving. So also, yeah, they can be your volunteers, but they're also the really hard working managers, middle managers who
Yes.
get things done, who will find a way. This, I love this idea that they are starting to find there's more than one road that leads to Rome. So
Yes.
yeah, I had my expertise and I knew how to, but actually there might be another way to do it that's more effective, that gets us there better.
Mm.
They'll bring other people in to do
Yes.
things.
Mm.
Um, and there's this enormous energy. I mean, the amount of things we need experts in our organization, and we definitely lean on achievers. The
Yes.
amount they get done, the energy they have, the work they put in, the conscientiousness, but
Yeah.
also the aliveness.
Yes. Yes.
And the focus on performance and getting our organizations to work.
Yeah.
Um, and I can even feel it, like this vibrance, this headiness of, oh, we're going to do it, and
Yeah.
it's going to happen. I'm transported back to the times when, as an assistant, actually in an organization, I was helping putting large proposals together for vendors, or as a vendor for clients, and you know, thinking, oh, but we can do it, and thinking up all the clever ways in which we could get things done. But the energy that brought, and then going home at 5 in the morning, knowing it was going to be sent off and we might sell a
Yeah.
lot more again. So that specific energy. And I did not have any expertise in any of that, but just weaving it together,
Mm.
um, I found really, really great. So I think
Yeah.
that's one of the things. And I've said once to one of my tutors on this topic, why would you ever want to leave the stage of achiever?
Yeah.
Because it's a vibrant stage. It's usually a successful stage. It's a hardworking stage. You get things done, you get the results. And of course, the challenge is then you start to notice that there's only so many days or hours in a day.
Yeah.
There's only so many days in a week, so many weeks in a month, so many months in a year. So I think for the achiever, it's that pressure of wanting to step even further up. You're becoming really successful with everything you do. But then as you want to go to the next level, you can't do it the same way anymore.
Yeah.
It's truly that moment in which something needs to shift,
Mm.
um, or you're going to get into burnout.
Yes.
Uh, you're going to be overburdened. You're going to be, so it's that, and it feels almost like an existential step of letting go of everything you've built up and believed in
Yeah.
to move into a new phase.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, so one of the main driving force for this stage, just to summarize each stage as the driving force and the challenge. So the driving
Mm.
force here is to achieve, not for myself, not just for myself, but also for others. So this is what's driving this stage. And as Setsky beautifully described this stage, full of energy and all of that. But as you would understand, that if I'm doing everything for myself and others, there will come a time when I feel burnout, and I'm looking for work-life balance that's no longer there. It's completely out of whack. So then I begin to question my current state or current way of doing things, current way of looking at the world. And at achiever stage, we start to delegate really well. So even though we are delegating and we are becoming more strategic and we are, delivering all the time, something comes along where we think we cannot do it anymore. We are either exhausted when we go home, or we are exhausted when we are at work, and we don't have that kind of energy anymore. And then slowly again, so as we have mentioned in the beginning, it's the limitation of the current stage that sows the seeds for the next stage. So when there comes a time when we feel limited or exhausted, whatever the limitation is or the challenge, a lot of family I know with the like hyperachiever people, the families start to break down because we can't give enough time to our families or any other issues or that we are dealing with. So then we are like, oh my goodness, there has to be another way. There has to be another way. And so say, take the example of the same organization where I am the outperformer, I'm the star, I'm doing everything. But then when I approach my organization and say, look, I need some work-life balance and I don't think I can do all of this. But in the meantime, I have delegated and I have prepared a whole team that can take over, so I can kind of move on and do something different that doesn't ask me of all these time commitment, and yet I can serve the organization even better way. So then I'm starting to question, and as you said, that even at this stage, there is a framework for how the society works, how the organization works, but I can't see it. Now I've begun to see that, oh, there are these, stages and there are these systems that are working. And I begin to start looking at the different systems and my place in the system. And then I think that there is more to it, and it starts to open up for me to go to the next stage. And I think the best named stage is redefining. So I just at this stage, so up until now, what we are doing, even with vertical development, we are expanding outwards, as you have noticed, from me to you to all of us to, all of that. So we are now expanding. And at redefining, we are taking an inward journey. So now from going outward, pause, start looking inside. So that's what starts to happen at redefining. And we are literally starting to redefine our work, organization, family, relationship, everything. So we are sort of like on a shaky ground, I would say. I have been there. I know what it's like. So everything is right and everything is wrong. Very, very, very strong relativistic perspective. I'm hesitant to advise. I'm hesitant to make decision because it's right and wrong. It's like all of that either or perspective has been broken, and I don't have clarity. So I'm constantly questioning myself. And so if I'm in an organization, the same organization that gave me, a little bit more of a, strategic thing to do, and I begin to question how the organization's working, how my society is working, how the system's working, and I'm spending all this time questioning and not making a decision, I could be seen as an indecisive, ineffective person. So there is the risk that comes along at this junction, at this station of life. Do you want to take on and add some more?
Yeah. So I'm just thinking because it's already so rich, everything you've said, and I'm just wondering what was happening because of your rich story. I was starting to see people in front of me where exactly that is happening.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of myself as in that stage in an organization with a manager who my hypothesis is was probably an expert in how that was a real struggle. Because we both saw the world so differently. And I was thinking as you were talking about, so yeah, it's redefining myself, my world. It's almost redefining my seeing of the world.
Yes, yes. That's a better way of
And
putting it.
things
Yeah.
that had been easy became, for me at least in that stage, quite difficult. So it became difficult to give feedback,
Yes.
be working with people, facilitators, and normally I'd give feedback and say, this was really well done, that you could improve. And now I was like, yeah, I maybe would have done that differently. However, there's also a point for how you did it, because who am I to say what?
Yes.
So there's that. So there can be that. There can also be almost cynicism, because
Yes.
if nothing is true, if I don't know, then then is nothing also of value.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so that was another reflection
mm.
um, on that stage, and I think it's a stage that's hard because
Yes,
it's leaving behind so much because from expert to achiever, for instance, you are building on something, right? So
yes,
you had that expertise, and now you see, okay, there's not just one way, there's more ways, but you're still going for that success within that framework. Now you're leaving behind trusted ground,
mm,
um, and you don't actually get something yet back in return.
yes, yes, mm,
You get an expansive, well, how you want to see it might be a mountain landscape. It might feel like a desert. It
yes,
might be like the sea.
mm,
And where are the boundaries now? And what do I let go of my former self?
mm.
Um, and some of that, I think you can only catch back in the next stage.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
so yeah.
The one thing that does happen is you gain the confidence to say, I don't know. And I think that's a biggest thing with redefining because up until
Mm,
achiever, we hold on to a truth. There is a truth that we can
yeah.
find either through knowledge or through hard work or through passion. But at this stage, there is no truth to be found as such. So we develop this confidence to say, I don't know. And you actually, deal with the world that way. And in some ways, it becomes easier and almost liberating. And the other ways is just, again, lack of decision, lack of, you're just almost paralyzed thinking, well, nothing is true and everything is true at the same time.
Mm.
So how do you then navigate the world? I think
Yeah.
becomes a big question. Yeah.
And I was almost seeing the picture, and I don't know if this is true, but it was just coming up as we were talking. I thought about when you're an achiever, you can be in your
Yes.
own prison about time boundaries, about what you need to achieve. But very much of that is actually driven by yourself. Now, you may not realize that as achiever, that you're
Yeah.
actually co-creating that prison. Um, and because you're part of creating it, it may feel a little bit more comfortable. Certainly, from my experience at redefining in an organization, all of a sudden you're starting to liberate yourself from that prison you've built yourself. And then the organization can, for some people, or at some times, start to feel like maybe more of a prison.
Yes.
So I know a lot of people who at that stage, that station, have left organizations.
Yes.
Certainly I did, and I moved back in, actually very consciously knowing I was at that stage and that if I wanted to grow further, I needed to go back into an organization because I needed that tension to learn.
Mm.
Um, but certainly, I think when I left an organization, it was at that stage.
Mm.
So there's some liberation, there's some being able to say, I don't know. That there was, and that may be personal. I felt also a little bit of arrogance of having moved out of that achiever prison.
Yes, yes. I think arrogance could be one word, but the also the other that, as I said, as we move from one stage to other, the previous stage becomes an object. So we can stand
Mm,
there from our current point of view and look back and go, oh, so this is how I have been, or this is how I was at that stage. And
yeah.
you feel, and I feel like each time I can look back and the transition, it always feels good. I have never sort of regretted going, oh, I wish I was still at that stage, or because those
Mm,
stages are still within us. So we can tap into them.
yeah.
Anytime the circumstances arise, we can tap into becoming an achiever or an expert or any of those things. They are within us. But redefining, I would say, is one of the most challenging in that sense because you are least understood by anyone. Um,
Mm,
or even in organization, you may be questioning it so much that people would wonder why you what you're doing there, and a lot of people, as you said, they leave. But some people may be stuck, as I'm wondering if there is no other option and that is the job for their existence or their family's survival, then they can't leave. So imagine not leaving and constantly questioning the place you are living. So it
Yeah.
must be very, very challenging for people who can't leave.
Mm.
And those who can, they do. They actually leave organizations at that stage. Um, and then, so can you join the transition dot? Like what happens?
Yeah, because I was just thinking about that. So I think if you can't leave, or if you don't want to leave, or if maybe you realize that growth may happen through an organization, um, actually, that is that challenge of this not yet being understood, not being so caught up in it's almost like caught up in denying things or um, seeing all the non-truths, then might lead you over the bridge to think about, so where do things come from? So if there's not an absolute truth, then how do we construct reality? Then what is happening? And so this far more clear sense of how we construct reality, how we create the world we see, that moves us into transforming,
Yeah,
which is far more aware both of the world around us, of the systems around us. So at redefining, we're beginning to see there are systems, and they're still quite mysterious to us.
mm,
Um, we can't quite grasp them, we can begin to grasp them.
yeah,
And at transforming, we can more begin to see, we can really truly begin to see those systems and also our own role in them, and our own
yes,
role in observing them, in creating them,
mm,
in our perspectives, in how we are co-creating and constructing the
yeah,
world we live in, that social construct, including the I we are showing up as. Um, and
yeah,
so that I still stays important in terms of who am I and which faces of my self am I showing? What is my shadow? What is my facade? What's my real me? And it then becomes more linked to, but how am I in that system and how am I navigating that? And I think it's also the first stage in which we're truly starting to be able to look back,
yes,
because we now understand we're part of a system, um, and how we're co-constructing that, that we can begin to look back at the stages that came
yeah,
before, and that are still in us. And we can now begin to navigate and make choices about, so what is needed here? Um, and it's almost like we're making a similar move as from the expert to the achiever, just at a next stage. So we're again are more about becoming than about being.
mm,
Um, and we're more around creating, achieving. So it's got a little bit more of that energy,
yeah,
uh, again, that movement, that wanting to create something, that wanting to um, leave a legacy, probably as well.
yeah, yeah. And I think just the one thing when you mentioned constructive, I thought for our audience, we have sort of missed this point that the whole premise of the vertical growth is that the world is absurd, that is meaningless. We create meaning. So that's the entire premise of how the vertical development occurs. So and that's why, we always notice that four people sitting in the room looking at the same thing, but defining it differently or literally understanding it differently. It's because that's why it's also called constructive developmental theory. So constructive
Mm,
means we don't take things as is. We don't see the world as is. We see the world as we are, I think is the tagline. And we
mm,
construct the meaning. And
yeah.
at each stage, it's a different meaning that we give to ourselves and the world around us. And so I just wanted to kind of add that little bit of a
Mm,
constructivism to it, because when we mention that we are constructing the reality, that's the entire premise of this theory, of this growth.
yeah. And so there's also something a little bit more redefining, even as a word. And I think even though all the words work, from achiever to redefining to transforming to alchemical, the words for me become more and more alive.
Yeah.
Uh, so redefining, while it is a verb, it's a verb that I can sit here and I can ponder and redefine. I can
Yeah.
sit on a stone out in the forest and do that. So it's not, this transforming has much more of an the active
Yes.
quality to it
Change.
again, right? So I'm doing something, and it's a different doing than at achiever,
Yeah.
but it's still, it's maybe more understanding all the systems, and then where is the one thing I could do to make a difference.
Yeah.
um, but it's still more, got more of that deliberate movement,
Mm.
creating deliberate movement quality to it than at redefining. At redefining, I might sow 1,000 seeds and hope that one blooms. And at transforming, I'm probably already more thinking about where's the perfect earth to
Yes.
sow. Um, and if I sow there, what might it bring?
Mm.
And having those different strategies
Yeah,
that
they
I
it's much more
use.
strategic. This stage is much more
Yeah,
strategic than simply questioning. And that was needed. Like redefining was needed because then we start to question, then
absolutely.
we start to have an idea that, oh, there are different systems. Oh, this is how the world kind of works. I can see that. But then until the transforming stage, we don't know how we can play that role that we want to play or the role that we are playing, or unless something becomes an object we cannot manipulate, right? So
Mm,
that's the whole idea.
yeah,
So
yeah.
transforming these systems become the object. We can look at the system and then we can reflect and manipulate. So anything that we become aware of, then we can reflect on it, then we can manipulate it, and then we can manipulation not in a negative sense, but we can
No,
actually
but yeah,
tinker with it. And
we can act on it. Yeah,
yeah. So I
yeah.
think transforming, that's literally we can transform the organizations, ourselves, our way of thinking, our way of doing. And the one thing that comes out of transforming, again, so the occupation of transforming is working with strategy, becoming very strategic and looking at the principles and all of that process and everything that comes along and kind of being able to have a grab on it. So it's almost like at redefining, we are in this ocean, very shaky storm, and we don't know which way to go because we are just kind of like shaking. At transforming, we are like, okay, there is a storm, but I have a boat, so I keep sailing.
Yeah,
I think that's what happens at this
yeah,
stage.
yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
so,
Absolutely. And I think then we're in the boat and we're sailing. And then, because having had all these existential questions at redefining, it's almost they're not quite put to rest, but we find some answers. And yet that is not quite enough towards the end of transforming. And my hypothesis is also that we start to experience that sometimes it's not all the work we do and all the well thought things, but it might actually be just this one tiny thing we do that moves, that creates the gold nugget, that uncovers something that's there, um, that we could not have worked to create. And so, and that question, actually, which you started with around, what's the drop and what's the ocean? Is it that question starts to play up again?
yes.
And as I was listening to you earlier, I thought some of the people listening may think, oh, but I've had that sense of being the drop and the ocean, being the watcher and the watched. So we can get into these states in meditation. And when we do, and that's just a state, that's really helpful to sort of play forward might be possible in a later stage, but that doesn't mean that we're in that stage. If we then go back and in our daily life, we're just still all about knowledge, or we're all about achieving
Yeah.
this outcome and being driven. So it helps us to move, and it isn't the same a state as a stage. And it's that early alchemical where it becomes about being again. It becomes about, so it is about being again,
Yeah.
uh, and sinking more into that and marrying opposites. Because in that transforming, also as you start to look back at all these different stages and seeing the value of all and trying to both create new things while respecting the old, that question comes, what is what? And is it good? Is it evil? Is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? And so holding all of that, becoming far more an instrument self, and holding all of that is then what comes online in alchemical. And for me, alchemical is a stage that I always think is very hard to describe, because
Yeah.
in some ways, for me, it's beyond words.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
maybe in poetry. It might be in a really good novel, but for me at least, in words that it might be in pictures or in art, but in words that describe it, it's really hard.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking, so, speaking of shadows, we had mentioned. And so I think at alchemical stage, those boundaries that I talked about, no boundary stage, it almost, we are starting to see the glimpse of no boundary life in a way.
Mm,
So we no
yeah,
longer hold particular beliefs or even strategic thinking. Like it's just we are more in the flow. People would understand the word flow. So our life, in a way, we are more in the flow than we are not. So we sort of starting to become river and at the mountain at the same time. So we are
yeah,
flowing, but we are also kind of just being there
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
looking at the world. So we become more and more like the witness of this game of life, than trying to be an expert in changing things or achieving things or even transforming anything. We are kind of slowly becoming a little bit more of a witness to everything. And as you mentioned, the drop and the ocean, we sort of experience more of things by becoming them. So we start to
mm,
see ourselves in everything. And I
yeah.
think to me, I'm not there. I think to me that would be the experience from what I have learned and read about is where, so say, we could name people like, there is this sage from India, philosopher from India called Ramana Maharshi. So his student asked him, he said, "Sir, how do you treat others?" And his simple answer very quietly was, "There is no other." you know
Mm,
that's the kind of philosophy, that's the kind of life that you begin to live
yeah.
at that stage. It's all the boundaries are broken, and you become one with nature, you become one with everything. And when we are there, I can only imagine the level of compassion we can have, and the level of empathy and the light that we can be for others. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe I'm being very idealistic about this stage, but I
Well, I was
feel like
thinking about that because I thought at that level, of course, because I think the level where all the boundaries are broken is probably a bit later. It's
yes,
one of those
probably
things
later. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not really measurable. Um, but I think at the early alchemical, of course, the reality is life is not only empathy and compassion.
yes,
So one of the challenges at that from that
yeah,
stage, and I think that stage is as hard for organizations in some way
yeah,
as redefining. It's easier for alchemical because
yeah,
there's maybe more of a, well, that's how it is. It's more and is. So maybe it's still being, but this is just, yeah, that's how it is. And
yes,
that's
yes. The acceptance
how it
of how
feels for
things
me,
are.
more acceptance, more. Um, However, I think, yes, it can be more compassionate when it is of course, it has to be also be able to be very little compassionate, because in the world there's not just compassion.
Oh, sure.
There's
Yes,
also
understand.
fierceness. There's,
Yeah, yeah,
there's piercing through, and there's naming of things that is really hard to hear.
yes,
So I think one of the interesting things for me about that stage is that it marries light and darkness,
yes,
and it
yes.
doesn't ask anymore, is it light, is it dark? It's more
It's
being
both.
with that is what is,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
which I think is a difficult stage for all of us. Um,
yeah,
and it's that, and so maybe the alchemist doesn't actually make gold out of lead. The alchemist shows that lead is gold and gold is lead,
gold is lead. Yes, yes. Mm.
which is hard, specifically for a world, for instance, of achievers, where there's a very big difference between gold and lead.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And
and it's
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
and so and it becomes almost, yeah. So it's not, but it's not because it's indifferent, as some people might be at redefining not everyone, or because it can't distinguish from truths, but because there is actually a similarity of
Yes,
quality in,
yeah.
and what we name it may make the difference rather than what it
What
is.
it is. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and it's seeing the gold nuggets, um, that can be created when others can only see lead, but it's also seeing the lead when others only see gold.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's yeah, and that's remarkable. That's actually a very good way of putting it. I'm just thinking, so just going back with the shadow, I think up until achiever stage, we are not really incognizant
Mm,
of our shadows, but redefining stage, slowly the idea of shadow and the idea is where there is light, there is shadow, or the longer light casts the longer shadow.
yeah.
And I think slowly at alchemical, as you are describing, is the light and shadow, day and night, good and bad, truth and lies. They are all part of one continuum. They are all one part where everything happens. So, and I think in that regards, yes, alchemical, I keep using the word compassion because that, I mean, maybe I'm just using that lens to see, oh, this really helps me becoming better and better at that. But yes, at alchemical stage, it will be compassion and hatred are part of the same coin. Like, it's just there. It's just is, and maybe I'll develop the ability to then ultimately see things as they are.
Mm.
So
And I still think that in some ways is more compassionate.
yes,
It's
yes,
just not all light.
yeah.
It,
Light comes with
it's
dark.
actually
Yeah.
accepting that even the darkness is also compassionate.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
light cannot exist if there is no darkness. And I think
Yeah,
those are the
exactly.
duality,
Yeah, yeah,
everything. I think that's
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all of that. Um,
so. I think that would be in essence what how we can define the vertical growth is that it's an inevitable growth as long as our environment is becoming um, conducive, and the only way our environment can become conducive is if it throws us the challenge in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes divorces are like a thing that people
mm,
go out of. Sometimes they don't because they didn't get the support.
we
Some
might move on.
life-threatening, yeah,
Yeah.
life-threatening disease. I think that can catapult
Mm,
people from, say, be someone is a diplomat who's always doing for others, and then they were diagnosed with a grave illness, for example, and then they sort of saw it and they thought,
yeah.
okay, now it's time to take care of myself, and then they redefined, like they completely changed their
Mm,
relationship with the world, maybe. And if the people in their lives actually supported that change, so then they can move to another stage. So these are some of the examples of how we grow, why we grow. But the end, I think one of the thing that we can summarize and say is like each one of us has the potential to get to alchemical. Whether we get to it or not, how much time it takes to get there, this is all a function of our interaction with our environment, I would say. So it's very much us and also the environment and the
Yeah.
connection and the
Yeah.
interaction between the two. So, yeah, I mean, it has been a wonderful journey for me. I can say that. And growing has been good, has been very, very challenging at times. But when the clarity comes, it really feels very good. And I hope that I do get the opportunity to continue to climb and continue to walk down this path. And yes, one of the important things I also wanted to share to the audience, and maybe you can chime in as well, is one of the ways to continue the environment challenging is by doing this, by doing exactly what we are doing. So Tsitske and I, we met as we have told you the story, in this, one of the forums, one of the trainings where the vertical development was the topic, and we continued the inquiry. So the sense of inquiry, to be alive, is very important. So I know that personally in my life, touch wood, at the moment, there are no specific challenges that can keep throwing me into seeing the world in a different way. But one of the ways it does is by my interaction with Siska. When she, for example, at alchemical stage, she rightly pointed out and intervened to say that compassion and empathy is not the only thing. There are other things that come along, and it's the ability to see them as it is, as a part of the larger whole. So therein, in that moment, for me, I saw something different. And this is how I am growing, definitely, with my interaction with Sitska. And we have these conversations. Sometimes there are these, even shadow conversation about like how I feel, and I feel like those are my shadows, and feeling free to have the interaction with other people, or spending time with people, both ahead or behind the journey, also gives us the glimpse of
Yeah.
where we have come from, where we can go.
And I think keeping that lens of curiosity. So for me, listening to you describe the stages now, and that was one thing. It could have been you describing something else, but now we were talking about these stages, listening to you. And as I was listening, noticing what was it evoking in me, what pictures was I seeing, or actually starting with you talking about vertical development, all of a sudden getting this picture that,
Yeah.
yeah, I thought about it as a man, but not in that way. So just opening ourselves up to meeting also things we know in a different way so that we can then reflect again, not just on how does it expand our knowledge, but also how does it expand how I've actually interacted with this, how I've seen this, how I've thought about this, how I know these things, and then I find it maybe hard to say. So I think it's that whole, can we be open to learn? And one of the things I've recently learned is about that also. Are we open to learn in public? Because that
Yeah.
creates also that vulnerability. So in a few times, thinking, oh, do I know how to say that? And then thinking, I'm not going to think about that. I'm just going to talk about it. And maybe I'm saying it wrong. Who knows? Someone might write to us and say, you got it all wrong. Um, and that would also, again, be a moment of learning.
Yeah.
So,
That would be amazing, actually.
so we would love to hear that. I've really enjoyed this, and I know we've actually gone much over what we normally plan. So this is a very long podcast. Maybe people need to break it up to listen to, but I think that's absolutely fine. So my suggestion would be that we stop it here, and
Yeah.
then next week we were talking about maybe doing some of our own autobiographies of how we've experienced these stages. Now, we've woven some of it through, but it
Yeah.
might be fun to do that. And I'm happy to volunteer to go first.
Yeah.
So
I think that would be
you,
lovely.
you can do the interviewing
Yeah.
in that. And of course, it will always be a dialogue because it is. So maybe we do that for next week. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much, and hope you send your comments, your questions to us, anything that you found surprising or anything that you thought was lacking, so we can keep improving and keep seeing you.